Hey everybody, it's Master Gallengeist here, bringing you my review of the latest episode of Moon Knight Asylum. And I overall enjoyed this episode. However, the biggest criticism I have of this episode is it is the fifth episode out of six. And to be honest, since I had such lukewarm feelings with the first episode, I almost think that that one needed to be retooled or whatnot. And this needed to have happened in the fourth episode at the latest, third episode at the earliest. Mainly because of we're dealing with all these important things going on with Mark and Steven and Towerette. And we're like one episode away from this being over, and we see that stuff's going on that's alluded to with Harrow doing whatever he's doing, but we don't get any movement on that front. So the last episode's got to be packed with a lot of shit to even get that like worked into a viable conclusion to figure out what's been going on while all this has been going on. And it's really kind of weird because I think that even though I wouldn't really kind of cut much of what's going on in here, it could have been condensed enough to be half of an episode. And I don't like saying that because I do like what is explored in here. So, let's see. The thing is, it follows kind of a sequential order, but it's more of a like, oh, is Mark dead, or is Mark in an insane asylum in Chicago, Illinois? And it keeps floating back and forth between that kind of stuff as things are going on, and I kind of get it. It gets us into Mark's headspace and everything like that, but I think it kind of again, we only have 6 episodes, so if it had been more just like the psychological aspect and delving into just the mind of Moon Knight as he's doing everything, that would have worked better than actually having the plot of like, hey, there's this dude that wants to resurrect Amet and pretty much prejudge people and just start throwing people in the duat. So we pretty much get we hear somebody screaming about a boy and shouting shit at this kid, and then we get pretty much back into what's kind of going on. We get the whole kind of back and forth, but we see Mark and Steven talking with Towerette, and Steven's like, oh yeah, goddess of women and children and like childbirth and all that kind of stuff, and yeah, she's a big influential Egyptian goddess, and she's the one that's kind of like running them through the whole kind of afterlife spiel, which was kind of interesting. Her character, I was like, okay, they didn't really do much with her, but the little that we got from her, like, oh, it's been a while since somebody's been down here, going through all of her cards and everything like that, like, oh yeah, this is like your afterlife and all that kind of stuff. It's really kind of weird. Never been in an asylum before, but yeah, it's like untethered consciousness. It's kind of like talking about like other kind of afterlives, talking about the ancestral plane from Black Panther. I'm like, that was a pretty good drop. She's like, yeah, thing is, we gotta like balance the scales, see what's going on with your heart versus the feather of truth, and if it works out, you go to the Field of Reeds, kind of like their Elysium Fields in Greek mythology, probably the ancestral planes kind of stuff, with like the Black Panther franchise. It's like, oh, okay, cool, we're exploring these kind of aspects and everything, and she's like, huh, that's really kind of weird. She like reaches into them, pulls out their hearts, and they look like colored stone, kind of like of course the color pretty much white, like linked to Khonshu and everything like that. She's like, it's going kind of weird. You kind of have to want to figure out what's kind of going on with everything. So in order for this to make more kind of sense, I'm just going to go chronologically of what's going on. So we pretty much get them going through all these different kind of things. We do not see who is in the third sarcophagus, so I don't know if that's going to play a factor, because for most of the parts it is ignored for some reason. It doesn't pop up again. It's like, okay, weird tease, but you'd think that'd be needed to be going on with what kind of happens throughout this. And we see that she brings them out onto the ship that's sailing through the Duat, and that if their scales are unbalanced, they get thrown into the Duat with the rest of the kind of like unbalanced souls and everything like that. If not, they go, of course, to the Field of Reeds. And it's just like going through all in this sand. I'm like, oh, this is kind of cool. Granted, I understand that you've got certain budget, but it was kind of cool to see that kind of representation of it sailing on all these sand dunes. And we don't get much on it, but I'm like, okay, that's better CGI than was like in the first episode with stuff. So I'm like, yes. And it's better utilized on something more important, showcasing the Egyptian afterlife for what's going on. I'm like, yeah. So we see that Mark had a mother and a father and also a younger brother. And that their food was being ready one day, but Mark's like wanted to go to this kind of cave thing, and his younger brother came, but it started to rain, and the younger brother's like, no, we shouldn't go in there because it's going to flood. But of course he called him out for it, pretty much calling him a wuss or whatnot, and they go in, and we see that during this part, Steven is in there trying to like call the boys out of it, but of course, unfortunately, Mark's younger brother dies. And of course, we then go to the morning kind of period, the wake, and the mother blames Mark fully, and it really sucks because yes, he is an older brother and he has a responsibility to his younger brother, but sometimes things just get out of your control and you can't handle those things. And the thing is, it's also on the parents as well to look after the kids for what's kind of going on. And if they're going to a certain place and things were starting to get kind of nutty and rainy and they know that it floods out, it's also on them. And it's just going to show what misplacing blame and everything and being angry about that kind of hits to, because we see the sequence of events and the memories. We see that she doesn't go down for one of Mark's birthday, while the father is trying to play the impossible role of balancing and being there for both of them, but we don't really see what he needs to do for the mother. She just goes into angry mode of always blaming Mark. We also see that Mark tries to stop Steven from like going into certain memories, but we eventually get through all of them, and that's why I'm going to be stringing it out in pretty much as chronological order as possible. We see that the mother just pretty much keeps blaming him for it, saying that he was jealous of his younger brother, and that of course he would do something like this. It's like, sweet Jesus, man. Like, as an older brother, I kind of have that kind of understanding of an older kind of sibling. That granted, I never like really went into tormentor mode on my sister or anything like that. I mean, we'd have our certain disagreements or anything, but I'd never be like, yeah, I'm gonna go and just like put my sister in a situation where she could potentially die just for shits and giggles. There are some siblings that have that relationship, but that's not what we've seen with Mark. He just wanted to have fun with his brother, and he misjudged the situation, and the parents weren't able to help out with that there. It's more like a case of like it was nobody's actual fault. Like, Mark didn't fucking take a knife and fucking stab his brother to death, and neither did the parents either. But you then see that how this one inciting trauma affects everyone involved. As she's doing this to Mark, he's like, screw this, goes into his room, and we see that he then that is where he creates the Stephen Grant persona from, of course, a video that he watched, and was then trying to clean up the room, and that it was a thing to help him kind of deal with everything, because we'd seen Harrow in the other kind of are you dead or are you in the real world in an asylum, tried to figure out if Steven is made to make up for all the horrible things, or if Mark is made up to exact justice and vengeance upon the world. It was like an interesting kind of way to kind of delve into which one's the real one and what's kind of going on. But of course, it does answer these questions in a good manner. And we see that the mother comes into the room and starts beating him and just berating him. And it's like, okay. This then, of course, leads him to leave home. And the father's trying to keep Mark there, but he then leaves off and decides to join the military. And the thing is, he's of course already mentally unstable and went AWOL and was dishonorably discharged. And his old CO sets him up to pretty much be a mercenary, but then on one of their things, it gets to a point where they got greedy, and Layla's father dies. We see that go on, and of course Mark couldn't handle that, and even though he has a penchant for doing violence because he has learned to deal with problems with violence because that's what his mother did, he's pretty much dying. And then we see that pretty much Khonshu came to him at a very low moment that he was thinking of killing himself. And then he's like, oh, that would be a waste. Why don't you become my Fist of Vengeance and, of course, become the Moon Knight? And, of course, we get the whole kind of thing. And I don't mind it when you have a character's name or whatnot showcased like that. It works more than it doesn't. But we see that Steven is like, wow, he really emotionally manipulated you. He put you, like, goddamn, he's just using you and using you and using you. Even though he's probably done some good, because we see pretty much the whole kind of consequences of like all the people that Marcus killed in his head, and we'd also seen the little brother popping up. That's what led Steven to kind of chase for him. Let's see, and that is how he became the Moon Knight, and we see him kind of work up like that. It's like, wow, he shouldn't have done that. I mean, granted, to give him a purpose to live, sure, yes, help him out. But you know that Khonshu is using him for his own gain and to do his own goals and everything, and to get him to being able to, like, walk around in the world and everything. And Mark needs help. So after doing that, they kind of come to a kind of grips with themselves. Now, granted, seems like they're getting into a spot where they're getting more balance. However, I don't know what is going on with the third sarcophagus, because that is pretty much just ignored. I don't know if it'll pop up later, but it might. We'll have to see how that goes on, because there's traditionally, to what I've heard from the lore, granted, I haven't researched deeply, there's like three main kind of personalities within Mark's mind. Let's see here. So we get pretty much all that. We get the lowdown and everything going on with that. Towerette's pretty much popping up periodically, like, you better kind of like wrap this up. And they're like, oh, you're kind of getting there, but we see that Harrow's doing his stuff. We see that more souls are being thrown into the Duat before their time. Towerette is like, what the fuck is going on? And some of them start coming on board because the scales weren't balancing, trying to take them. Mark's doing his best to kind of fight off, and Steven's trying to help him. He's like, wait a minute, I know what you know, and pretty much tries to help fight. We see that Steven gets to that point where he is able to utilize his stuff, utilize the same kind of skills that Mark does. It's interesting because the Steven kind of personality is utilized to be the more what he kind of considers a good person, I believe, that would have been good with his mom, because we'd seen the inciting incident that had led to more of the kind of demarcation between them because his mother died. We saw him fighting with the Dr. Harrow about that, and that he did show up for the like morning period, but he didn't go in, and it was really messing with Mark. And then he switched to the Steven persona and was like talking to her on the phone and everything. So the mother thing wasn't a kind of information gathering thing for like when Steven's out and about. It was just what he was, and Steven was the one that loved the mother, whereas Mark had the complete opposite kind of relationship with that. And you kind of need to bridge those two together. And we see that kind of happening as Steven is able to more effectively control and help out. However, we see that Mark is in a compromised position, and Steven helps him, but he falls off the boat and then gets turned to sand. So I don't know if Steven is completely gone, or if throughout his kind of epiphany and utilizing the same kind of skills that Mark does to fight off the unbalanced souls, how that kind of works out. And Mark's calling after him, but the scales balance at that point. He is then put into the field of reeds because they were trying to go for the gates of Osiris to lead them back into the world of living and to affect and stop what's going on with Arthur Hara. However, the scales balanced and Mark is now in the field of reeds. So we do have this kind of big thing of how does he get out of there? How does he free Khonshu? How does he get his powers back? And how does he stop Arthur from what's going on and what is happening at this point? There's just a lot of ground to cover in a final episode that should have been covered in this episode. You set up for like your denouement and your climax in the penultimate episode, if not even get there in that episode, to then have your falling action so that way you can like bring things to a close. This, we still have a lot of kind of stuff going on, so I don't know if the next episode is going to be longer to fill that in. See, it's really kind of weird because I like this episode for how it explores trauma and what it has done to individuals, and how an inciting traumatic event, the death of a loved one, warped the mother's feelings for her eldest son, and that then in turn broke a boy into creating other personalities within himself, and what that has led him to do as an adult and as an individual, and how he views himself and how he views the world. It's fascinating and it's good. The thing is, it's kind of derailed the plot to a point. Not completely derailed it. It's still going on, but it's pretty much put a hard stop on the plot. And the thing is, I like what this is. The placement of it is what's kind of mucking with the rest of everything going on here. So, they got a problem here of how to kind of like effectively make it so that way the pacing in the next episode is not rush, shit, fuck, damn, everything's happening at once kind of effect. Okay? And that's really my biggest kind of problem with this episode. And I hope that it's able to kind of overcome it, because I think they did a very good job of handling this subject matter well. It is never easy to deal with, like, the death of a loved one and then, like, child abuse and a strained relationship between the abuser and the one who's being abused, and everything going on with that. So they did handle it well enough, in my opinion. We'll just kind of have to see how it kind of shakes out from here. So those are my opinions on the episode. Tell me what you guys think in the comments below. If you liked it, if you didn't like it, if you agree with me, if you disagree with me. Also, like and subscribe, and I hope you have a good day.